2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake. You are an individual from a disenfranchised community. You are a pastor, and we think that there are many different reasons for being disenfranchised and being in a disadvantaged community, whether that be economic disenfranchisement or whether that be you are from some sort of minority. It is not a good situation, and people to a large extent are suffering. That is to say, we believe that the things you tell people are particularly important, which is why we are very proud on our side of the house to tell you that God's plan as a narrative, though legitimate, though valid, does more harm than good in this particular situation and therefore must be deprioritized. A few key points of setup we think are relevant for this debate. Number one, this is a value judgment debate with somewhat of an embedded actor of the pastor and how these particular pastors have their interest of being able to help the community break away from this sort of disenfranchised situation, whether that be structural inequality, economic disenfranchisement, being a minority, or all of the above. The common denominator here is that there is someone or something which prevents a structural disadvantage which you have to be able to transcend. It is in your interest to rally the community together towards some sort of structural reform. This debate is a comparison of narratives in terms of prioritization, because if we could have all things, then that would be cool. But we think with narratives, you need to be very clear and consistent with what you're preaching to a community. Too many narratives confuse and contradict each other. Secondly, what is this God's plan narrative? It is the narrative that includes but is not limited to God gives his hardest battle to his strongest soldiers. This includes all things which have an element of predestination and destiny in terms of telling people that God willed what's happening, there is reason behind your suffering and disenfranchisement. This is valid, there is hope, all of that, but we think in terms of strategy, in terms of being able to be less disadvantaged or less disenfranchised, it is your duty as a pastor to be able to forward those particular things and reject the copium that side opposition will tell you later. What is our narrative we want to forward? What is our counterfactual? Very clear. Our counterfactual is that whatever it may be, there is a structural reason behind your disenfranchisement. My guess is to say that it's probably the greedy and those people who are hoarding. If you take a look at what these religions teach and in the Bible, these people are the bad guys. They're corrupt, the greedy, the haves versus the have-nots, and the very people who are at their base using other people to be able to get what they want. POI preference by a chat, please, right here. What do we want to happen here? We want to push the people who are wealthy to be able to give more money, to be able to put their community at a position out of this disadvantaged situation. And we want those people who are suffering to develop a sense of agency, to be able to take things into their own hands and not just think everything is dictated by God, no matter how comforting that would feel. And lastly, we want for these greedy and corrupt people who push this particular disadvantage to your community to be brought to the light. But sure, opposition, go ahead. I'll take a POI. 100% yes. We think that the pastor should use all of their capacity and charity to actually raise particular money and use that towards helping people, so we aren't stuck in this resiliency trap that side opposition will probably talk about. Because the reason why people are suffering is because there are particular people in power who are actually putting those particular blockages either through corruption, out of greed, out of nepotism. And the point in which you accept the Kool-Aid of God's plan is the point in which you start saying, God wills it. It's okay. There's meaning in my suffering. I'm just gonna pray and hope. But what then happens? The next typhoon season happens. The next thing happens and people get caught in a trap as opposed to being pushed to take their own agency for their particular life. What is my argument? It's threefold. They're going to be interrelated. The first is, why exactly it is in the interest of pastors to prioritize this particular thing. Number two, where do we get better structural reform? And lastly, why exactly do we likely get that reform when we deprioritize this idea of God's plan? Let's dissect what they meant by that POI. What they meant by that POI was that there's a certain comfort and community and copium that you get in a desolate and shitty situation. I agree with that. But the problem there is that side opposition will always be outcome dependent on people being strong. But we have to understand that this exists in a spectrum wherein you have people who are very faithful and very resilient, you have people who are moderates and in the middle, and you also have people who are battered by life and people who are suffering. And we think we cater to majority of people in terms of scope and scale who are probably moderate or who are probably losing faith in that particular situation. The problem when you prioritize God's plan is that you rob people the agency and capacity to make decisions. But side opposition might say, no, Joseph, it's God's plan that reinforces that particular thing. We can co-opt all of your benefits too. That is a lie. That's not true. Because the point in which you tell people that it's God's plan is a point in which people, to a large extent, gaslight themselves and accept their own desolate situation and become dependent on the very actors that they're hoping to give them donations. We think that oftentimes churches and pastors have a lot of money and have a lot of political capital to be able to push those very people who are greedy to actually do things like be less corrupt and actually build proper infrastructure to get out of that particular thing. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, people on our side will be emotionally charged, but we think that is good because this actually leads to structural change and reform happening when they're able to go to their local concejal or their mayor and tell people, you know what? It's consistent with our doctrine and Bible that you people are being greedy, you people are being nefarious, and you people are stealing from us. We reject all of that copium bullshit. What do we tell you from our side of the house? It's very simple. God's plan is a valid ideology, it's a valid teaching, but when push comes to shove, when you are disenfranchised, when you are desperate, when you are disadvantaged, it is not the way to go. We need people foaming at the mouth to be able to understand and bring those people into the light. I'm very proud to open this debate.